Welcome to the podcast series of Passive Fire Protection hosted by the Encon Group. This series aims to cover a range of topics from regulation, compliance through to specific products and manufacturers' products and various solutions that they may have for a number of applications. Today we welcome Josh Slack from Promat, who's the Commercial Director. So welcome, Josh.
Thanks. Morning.
A particular area you would like to address today is the gap or the gap between testing and reality. So what do you see as the issue here?
Yeah, morning. Thanks. This is a problem or something which we've been coming increasingly aware of, I guess, over the past 3 to 4 years. Those who work within passive fire protection, probably those who work across construction, will have seen a lot of change within the industry over the past few years. There's been changes in legislation, changes in the approach to risk and design around passive fire protection. And one of the big changes we've seen is that project teams are desiring to see tested evidence a lot more for solutions which they're using on site. And I suppose the challenge with that is that the tested system is often not matching the problems as they are on site exactly, or there's a bit of a gap between how the system is tested and then all the needs on site to make that work as a full design.
Okay, so this isn't a new problem then. It's been around for a while. So why the focus on it now? Why is it such a big thing now?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it probably has been around as an issue for many years. I suppose the reason why it's come to the fore of late is because the approach to solving that issue has changed, or perhaps come under increased scrutiny. So, go back 5 or 10 years, things like assessments were much more common. Assessments to kind of bridge that gap between what's tested or a test standard, and again the issue on site. Things like engineering judgments, which manufacturers would have undertaken, or similarly termed assessments. There's also been a shift from British standard testing to EN testing. And I think the EN testing standards tend to be more prescriptive in their approach. They also tend to be written to apply to a standard set of systems. So if, like us as a manufacturer, you have quite specialist types of systems that don't necessarily fit exactly within that common group or that common standard, then extending the performance of that tested application can be a challenge, or perhaps not fit directly within that. So I think that's where the challenge then lies, because all of those things have reduced in their how commonly design teams are doing that. It's then, how do you get that solution? Who takes on that responsibility? Who undertakes that design to bridge the gap from testing to then applying a solution?
Has this happened more since the Grenfell fire that took place 30 years ago? Has that been the catalyst, the driver for this?
I think you're right. I think you're 100% right that was the catalyst for looking into these. And I think the change is a good thing. I think when you look at some of the assessments that have been undertaken, a lot of the time, or some of the time, you would look at those and think it wasn't a robust enough process to be undertaken. So yeah, for sure, that was the catalyst.
So give me an example, and give me an example of an issue that perhaps you've experienced at Promat.
Sure. So as I say, we come across this quite a lot. I suppose the more common examples for us are a lot of the time around interfaces. So we do a lot of structural steel encasement systems, and often they're interfacing with partitions, with ceilings. Sometimes
very topical at the moment.
Very topical. Yeah. Sometimes if you have a cellular beam that's protected, you may have services running through it, which would need to be fire stopped. And all of these things would have test standards for the partition, the ceiling, the steelwork encasement, the fire stopping in isolation. But it's then the interfaces between these systems, or when you've got to build up multiple ones of these systems together, that you don't have the test standard to do all of that.
So what do you do? What is the answer to that? Because there's a lot of things you've mentioned there, which is of interface in particular with different manufacturers' products and things like that. That must be a real challenge.
Yeah, and I think you've pulled out another one there. Different manufacturers' products, potentially different manufacturers with a different view on what the right approach to take is. And I think what we have seen on a number of jobs is that sometimes a stalemate, position almost does get reached. To me, I think there's probably a few different solutions or a few different approaches that can be taken to try and unravel this or try and progress the designs forwards. I think as a manufacturer, the first one is we could turn around and say, well, we test to the test standards, we give you that information, you are the designers, it's your job to then work that through and determine how the design should work. I'd say it's probably not the most helpful of solutions, and given where we are with people wanting to take on design risk, it is probably not one that's particularly productive, and I think we all need to try and push it forward. So the second option potentially is that we could take on some of that design risk as a manufacturer. We could say, okay, we'll do the design for your fire element or various points of your design. Again, I think various challenges that exist with that. Yeah. And to me, the third option would be for us to say, okay, we're going to do additional testing to create more information to allow the designers to reduce their risk and to make better design decisions.
I'd imagine, Josh, one of the challenges as being a manufacturer in relation to testing and assessing is that these things are expensive things to do. So if you are constantly having to upgrade, test new tests, junction details, all those type of things, how do you handle that?
Yeah, you're right. It is expensive, and I think the particular challenge that comes when you come outside of testing standards is that every ad hoc test you do will be very specific in the setup and then very specific in the application which you're using it for. So that cost, where you're testing to a standard, you're going to get repeat application out of that, many times. If you're doing something very specific to address a particular issue on site, that cost is probably need to be fully absorbed by that application.
So a test is more expensive to do than an assessment?
Typically, yes.
Okay,
it
and
can vary.
You want to, obviously, whatever needs to be done, but would you say you're doing more tests than assessments these days?
Yeah, we're doing a lot more testing than assessments these days, and even the more ad hoc testing we're doing more of than assessments. I guess what we try and look for, even where it is an ad hoc test, is we try and address an issue that we see coming up multiple times so that we know there's going to be good value for us and good value for customers and users of that product from that ad hoc testing.
Oh, very good. So, Josh, do you feel there's a collaboration here between yourself and other manufacturers on where some of these interfaces are to overcome some of these problems?
I think that's definitely a route forward, and definitely something which is of benefit to the industry. It's something we have looked at doing. So we have FSI within eTex, who are a fire stopping company. Yes. So we're increasingly trying to do solutions where we test with their products to overcome some of these challenges that are outside the test standard. So an example being we fairly recently tested cellular beams fire stopped with FSI fire stopping products. We've also done some steel beams encased with Promat board with then Cineac partitions running to the underside of those encased beams. So again, that interface not covered by a test standard, but we can undertake an ad hoc test to give information, to give evidence which design teams can use.
I can remember in my days when I was at Promat, when people used to come on to see, a lot of it was about assessments, it was about opinions. Yeah. Those days are long gone, are they?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think those days, certainly for now, are long gone. And that has been a challenge for us because a lot of these scenarios would have been, as you say, covered by assessment. Someone would have been looking at the data and then creating that link. Whereas now design teams are really looking for that test evidence to help them make that link or to help somebody to do that.
Yeah. I think it's a really good topic, actually. It's quite topical within the ASFP as well at the moment, isn't it? I know we've been on seminars recently where the topic's been discussed on interfaces and testing and the difference between testing and assessments and all those type of things. So it is very topical. I don't think the problem's going to go away.
No.
I think we've got to get better at finding solutions, haven't we, to how we overcome some of these issues related to it. But
yeah, I agree. And I think For me, we do get challenged a little bit by project teams, by designers who say, well, you're the manufacturer, you come up with the design solutions. And for me, as manufacturers, we're not as qualified as design teams, architects, engineers. We don't have the skills that they do in terms of design. So for me, the design does sit best with them. They're also impartial, whereas obviously as a manufacturer, if we were making the design decisions, we've got a vested interest to judge it one way or to make it work. But I think you're right. I think there is an onus on us as manufacturers to come up with more data, to have more testing between those points, to give people more confidence, to allow them to make those jumps and
I think because also you've just highlighted there in terms of the design side of things as well, it's perhaps that engagement at an earlier stage.
Yeah.
With this industry's gone from the architect was the specifier to moving more towards design and build and design on the run a little bit. I think with the Building Safety Acts and the gateway scenario coming in as well, it will push us to ensuring that designers are talking to people like yourselves at an earlier stage, so that you can...
I think that's right. Yeah, I think the earlier you can engage with a specialist who can, even if it is as much as guiding you through what is tested, what can be tested to a standard and where your gaps may be, you're right, the better a chance you've got of making some decisions around perhaps there's some bespoke testing that needs to happen, perhaps there's some further information we're going to need to gather, or perhaps we can change the design to make it more standard and align more with testing standards rather than, being outside and having lots of bespoke type interfaces. So I think you're right. I think the earlier you can start having those conversations and start that engagement, the better a chance you have of solving it.
Well, I think that was a very interesting topic and discussion there, Josh. So thank you very much for that. And we look forward to seeing the solutions and a better engagement moving forward. So thank you.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.